Hello and welcome back to another edition of GNAT-TV's In-Depth series. I'm Andrew McKeever, the news director at GNAT-TV's News Project. It's a pleasure to have you with us today on Monday, May 9th. Our guest today is Colonel James Baker, who, as many of you know, is the retired commander of the Vermont State Police. He served with the Vermont State Police for over 30 years until he retired in 2009 as the commander. But he wasn't finished then. Wasn't finished yet. He also took on assignments as the police chiefs in Manchester and then in Rutland, and also at the Vermont Police Academy. And more recently, he ran the Vermont Department of Corrections, a job that I think Colonel Baker was supposed to be for a couple of months, but then along came the COVID pandemic, and he wound up being there a couple of years, I guess.
Yeah, it was supposed to be 120 days, 4 months, and 22 months later, a little bit of a pun here. I was paroled, so I was I moved on.
Well, all right, yeah. Sometimes life doesn't always work out the way it's planned, I guess.
Exactly right.
As something I'm sure you learned very well during your long and very distinguished career in law enforcement. So anyway, to fast forward to the present, now you have a new leadership coaching and consulting business that you've started up. I guess want to definitely dive into some of your thinking about leadership and what might be going on with that. But I guess first question would be, after such a long and remarkable career in law enforcement, what led you to try your hand at coaching and consulting on leadership?
Well, I think you kind of laid out what I've been doing for the last 10 or 15 years, and during the course of these experiences I've had, I've really come to see, there's great leaders out there, but sometimes organizations don't do a good job of developing their leaders for what the needs are in the 21st century. And as you look around, I don't, just take any sector you want to talk about. Healthcare is having a hard time finding leaders. There was just an article in the news within the last couple of weeks that the number of superintendent and principal positions opened in Vermont. The number of police chief positions opened up around the country. I mean, you take a lot of different sectors, especially in public service or the service areas, there's a real lack of leaders. And I've learned through these experiences that there's not a lot of effort made to develop leaders in a lot of organizations. And so I decided that I could take the experiences I've had over the last several years and take those experiences and see if I could share what other folks have shared with me that helped me do some of the stuff that I've done over the last 10 or 15 years, because it's all built on the shoulders of other people that really mentored, coached, guided me, gave me a good stern chewing when I needed it. And I wanted to be able to share that. And I think I can have an impact on people's careers and their personal lives by helping them develop skill sets and thought processes that'll make them more effective leaders.
What do you see as one of the elements of a good leader or good leadership? Are there certain qualities that are kind of universal across that?
Yeah, well, look, I think, another reason why I think it's timely for me to launch off into, especially the coaching end of what I want to do. And I have ideas about, TED Talk type opportunities in the area. But look, if you want to be an effective leader today, you better understand that it's about people. And if you don't have the skills or the ability to create environments and cultures where people feel that they're safe, and what I mean by that, I don't mean physically safe, psychologically safe. They feel like you have their back, that you care about them. You care about them more than just what they do for work. You're not going to be effective. And that's a lesson I've learned in the last 10 or 15 years, especially going into organizations that I have gone into, I've been asked to go into, that have been in trouble. without fail, what I found is employees don't feel like the leadership of those organizations cared about them. And there's just a survey I saw the other day, Andrew, a Gallup survey. One out of four people feel that organizations care about their well-being. Only one out of four. In 2014, it was 25%. Right around the pandemic breaking out, it spiked up to about 49% in May of 2020. And why is that? Because leaders of organizations across the board, Fortune 500 companies, the Department of Corrections, rescue squads, fire departments, stewards, coffee shops, they had to create plans to take care of the well-being of their employees. So that went up. And now it's fallen even lower. The last survey that Gallup did, it's down around 19% of the employees feel like their employer really cares about their well-being. And when you're in the market we're in right now, where, and I say this all the time with some of the clients I have now, you're one or two bad decisions away from losing your entire workforce, because they can pack their bags up today and start a new job tomorrow. In many cases, making more money. And so it's more important than ever in my mind that to be an effective leader, you need to understand it's about people. It's not about you. It's about the organization. It's about why you're there and what the purpose of the organization is. And how do you take the people in that organization and fit them in to working on that why and that purpose, and building collaborative teams within the organization to get the work done. And if you can't do that, if you don't have that skill set or you don't feel confident, you're going to struggle in the 21st century as a leader, because people are very mobile right now and they can go anywhere they want and start working. 26,000 jobs open in Vermont right now. You can go anywhere. So that's a little bit of how I see what leadership ought to be. There's a lot of other stuff, that goes into it, but it really does start with people having a purpose, understanding why you're in the position and what your role is, and making that connection with people that work for you, that they feel like you have their best interest. Now, you get into discipline and all those kind of things you have to deal with, but people want to know that their leader really cares about their well-being.
Is this something that's fairly recent, relatively speaking, do you think? Or has it always been the case, going back decades, that it's been important to employees or the people who are in an organization to be able to look to who's in charge and say that person is concerned that, I'm advancing my career at a good, fair pace. I'm being compensated fairly, whatever the metric is that the person's using, or is that something that's kind of a relatively newer phenomenon that the boss of an organization is responding to a board of directors or whoever they're reporting to, and that's kind of capturing most of their attention?
Yeah, listen, I think, well, look, I've been in the workforce, for 50 years, right? And I've always wanted to know that the person I work for cared about my well-being, but I think it's more pronounced now today, Andrew, because I think the generation of the workforce that's coming in, that's an expectation that they have, and I think it's become more pronounced because people can be more mobile. They are. Folks that are in the workforce are much more balanced in their lives. I remember the early days of the state police, I thought it was a big deal if I worked 15 hours in a day. Well, I came to understand that that's just not healthy. Not healthy for you. It's not healthy for your relationships. And so I think it has changed quite a bit because people are more likely to voice their opinion now, and they're much more mobile. And so if you want to keep employees, if you want to keep your retention, you have to understand that they're expecting you as a leader. They understand it's business. They understand there's a product, whatever it may be, needs to be put out. But in that process, I believe there's an expectation now that people feel like they're valued, they're part of a team, they fit into the culture. The value system that you have as a leader fits the value system that that employee has. And a lot of this has come from my experience over the last 10 years of managing organizations out of a crisis.
The other thing I just wanted to kind of explore with you was, we talked in the past about good leadership, and particularly as it related to communities. Why some communities, let's say, you could probably take it back to, I suppose, the 70s and 80s when a lot of economies of certain communities started to undergo some change. Maybe a factory that had been a source of a lot of jobs and employment in the community closed or moved to another location, and people were thrown out of work, and some communities kind of floundered for a long time. Others seem to kind of say, well, okay, that was the past. There's a new era coming now. Let's adjust to that, and went on to, not just survive, but thrive. And it's always been a theory of mine that, a lot of the reason why some communities seem to make that adjustment better than others is that they had a core of leadership in the community, whether it was at City Hall or Town Hall, or maybe it was within the business community, maybe it was in area churches or other kind of social organizations. But somewhere in the mix, there was leadership that was saying, hey, we can get through this. I guess I just wondered, do you think that having that kind of, group of spark plug people really is critical, or are there many other factors beyond just that?
Well, listen, I think what you just described is exactly what I would answer the question for you. I mean, I think when a town is, and you described it, right? New England, old time manufacturing town, manufacturing closes down. I mean, I'll use Pownell as an example. The racetrack closed down and the town struggled, right? And I remember just being in the county talking to people. They had this vision. They wanted to bring the racetrack back, and it's like, can't let go of the past and create a vision for the future. And I think where leadership comes into that is that if you've got a solid leader that can build collaboration around an idea and create a vision and then marshal those resources around that vision, then you're going to be more likely to succeed than people sitting around and still talking about what it was like 10 or 15 years ago. It's kind of like standing up at a school board meeting and somebody my age stands up and says, when I was in school, well, guess what? That was 50 years ago. There's a few things that have changed since then. And so I think that's where leadership really comes in, Andrew. And I think either in small town government or even in organizations. Some of the organizations I went into that were in crisis, people were holding on to the past. Some of it was around trauma from the past of bad decisions that were made, and people were holding on to some of that luggage, but also holding on to what it was like 10 or 15 years ago. And I know you had on the list talking about law enforcement, but that's an example of what's the challenges in law enforcement are today. It's not 10 or 15 years ago, it's changed. And the other key thing I would say is, if you're, when it comes to coaching individuals on leadership, if you're a person that for years ignored citizens' voices, those days are over with. If you're a public servant today and you're not paying attention to what people have to say, you're going to get swallowed up as a leader, because it's too easy to marshal resources through social media. And it's not always the reality when that happens either. People create messages that aren't based in reality, but it becomes the dialogue of the community or the organization or the state, or the country. And I think people need to understand that That's another area that I've come to learn when I talk about 21st century leadership.
Well, let me just return back to the point you were making right at the start of our conversation here about there seems to be a lack of leaders currently out there, or at least a relative lack. I mean, why do you think that's so?
So you're a superintendent of a school, you're a police chief, and you're getting bombarded with personal attacks. There's people protesting in front of your house. I mean, that's the world we live in today, and I think people are getting tired of it. And I think the pandemic, from my view, the pandemic accelerated that type of, wear a mask, don't wear a mask, quarantine, don't quarantine. We've become very divided. If you're a public servant, you're subject to a lot of attacks, and it's very difficult to be in that space today. And again, going back to why did I decide to move into this next generation of my life? That's another area where people need some help getting coached through, because it's not easy being in the public eye today. But I also think even in private industry, it's not easy. Your employees expect you to do certain things, and it's very difficult to be in those positions. And the final piece is the organizations I've been inside of that have been troubled. There was nothing done to develop the next generation of leaders. And as a result, there's a leadership void in a lot of organizations and a lot of public service organizations.
So do you think leadership is something, well, clearly you must think it's clearly something that can be taught or at least coached or developed. Is it also sort of intuitive in a way where it's just sort of a, certain personalities lend themselves better to being, I don't know, leaders? Or
yeah, listen, I think there's certain things that I think it's both, actually. I think there's certain intuition that you have that you're hardwired with your upbringing. In my case, look, I grew up in a family around people that taught me early on about empathy. I grew up in a small town. One of the neighbors passed away. Everybody made their favorite dish, or I remember a certain neighbor around us, Mrs. Shea, who made these unbelievable homemade rolls. So as a 10-year-old kid, I started reading the obituaries to see if Mrs. Shea was going to make rolls or not, right? Because everybody in the neighborhood took care of each other. And I think there's certain things that are ingrained in individuals, but I do believe that if people have the right purpose and they're operating from a space of being inquisitive and wanting to learn, that you develop leaders. Now, somebody that's got a faulty moral compass, if their moral compass isn't northbound, then you can work all you want with a leader. You're probably not going to end up with those outcomes I was talking about earlier if their moral compass isn't northbound. But other than that, I do believe that you can develop leaders. You expose them to opportunities, you let them make mistakes, you guide them. And I do believe you can develop leaders. I've seen it. And again, in some of the organizations that I was brought into, some of the proudest stuff I've done is worked with people that no one thought could become effective leaders, and they turned out to be very effective leaders.
Is there a difference between leadership, like sort of every day or just day to day, week to week, month to month, versus crisis situations? I mean, you've been thrown into a number of crisis situations over the course of your career. Is leadership under those kind of stressful circumstances or moments, are there different aspects to that than just sort of being the person who shows up every day at 9 o'clock or whatever and does the job and, keeps the lid on?
Well, look, not to take this to like the big global picture, right? If anybody wants to see someone that's operating in crisis leadership and doing an incredible job, look at the president of Ukraine. If you want to learn lessons about crisis leadership, pay attention to what that guy's doing. President Zelensky his country's under attack. I don't want to get into the politics and who believes what, but unless somebody's got a hell of a movie studio somewhere, what you're seeing on TV and the damage that's being done and the people that are suffering. But he's staying positive, he's staying focused, but he's mission driven. And so to answer your question, obviously I've never found myself in a situation like that, but I found myself in situations where organizations were in crisis mode. And what happens in that situation is it's like you're on a treadmill running as fast as you can, going nowhere. And the first thing you need to do is slow down the treadmill. And you got to pay attention to the decisions you're making, because under those circumstances, the decisions you make have much more weight than they do on a normal day, because people are just waiting for the other shoe to drop. And so there is a difference, but I think the skill set is very similar, but you have to really have a sense of urgency in order to establish. If you're coming in from the outside, for example, you've got to have a sense of urgency to establish yourself. And I call this taking up the leadership space, occupying that space, and sending a very clear message that you are here to lead, and that you're going to get this problem solved, and giving people hope. You know, one of the biggest things leaders do is give employees hope, give communities hope that, you know, it's going to be a better day tomorrow.
You also, and over the course of the last few years, led the Arlington Renewal Project, community initiative there to bring the shine back to Arlington, I believe the expression was. I'm curious, you know, what were your takeaways from that leadership role? I mean, I guess that takes us back into the community side of all of that. But I'm sure there must have been some lessons you learned from that whole experience as well.
Yeah, well, listen, I think, Andrew, if you look around Arlington right now, it doesn't look like it did 5 years ago. You know, it's, 2 weekends ago or a week and a half ago, the first annual fly fishing, event happened in town, brought 300-ish people into town. And I guess when you talk about that experience, it's really that experience. It was about listening to people, paying attention to what people wanted, and creating a vision that was built around that collaborative effort. And we had that saying early on, collaborating for the greater good, which I have to confess I stole from Project Vision in Rutland. But that collaboration for a greater good really is one of my pet sayings when you talk about leadership. And bringing coalitions together and collaborating amongst those coalitions is not easy. But in the 21st century, that is the future of leadership, is being able to take, I'm a bit of a fan of General McChrystal and his book, Team of Teams. He's running a consulting firm in Washington now. I track what they're doing. And a lot of their effort is focused on how do you collaborate amongst varying teams in order to get the outcomes that are going to benefit, in the case of Arlington, the Arlington area and the community. And so the lessons I took away from that are just reinforcing what I learned when I was in Rutland about giving a community hope and building coalitions around collaboration and putting the right people in place in order to carry that vision forward.
Police departments in a lot of places have become very controversial hotspots lately. Why do you think that's so? I mean, do you think that people have unrealistic expectations of what the police can do or should be doing?
Andrew, I think we could do a 2-hour show on this.
We probably could. This should have been the first question instead of the last one.
It's complicated. Well, we would have just taken up the whole time chatting about this, but it's very complicated. It's, there's a reckoning happening in law enforcement that goes back several centuries. And the problem we have is that both sides on this issue are yelling at each other and no one's listening. And it's kind of interesting to me that, again, I'll be the first one to tell you that, I worked in Washington for a while. I had a front row seat for the work that was going on in the Obama administration. And then I saw the Trump administration come in while I was still there. And I don't want to talk about politics because this is not about politics. But I had a front row seat for understanding what goes on in some police departments in the country. And it's hard for people back in Vermont to understand that there were some serious issues in marginalized communities about over-policing of the communities and the way those communities were policed like it was a war zone, and the way we thought and the way we trained police officers. On the flip side of that, I know a lot of unbelievable, forward-leaning, 21st century thinking police leaders that don't get enough credit because the expectations are too high. That generations of marginalizing individuals is somehow supposed to radically be solved by a police chief. And then you layer on a mental health system that hasn't kept up with what it needs to keep up with. The underinvestment in communities, and leave it to the police to clean up the mess. I said 10 years ago, just before I left this, longer than that now, I guess, it's going to be 13 years this month that I retired from the state police. I remember having a conversation with commanders at the state police that 5-6 years down the road, police agencies are going to look more like social service agencies than law enforcement agencies, because the social problems were building up back then: homelessness, marginalized communities that don't get the services they need. And what we have right now, in my opinion, is we're yelling at each other across a valley, and we're not coming to solutions on how to resolve this differences that we have in these communities. And the fact of the matter is, and I'll debate this with anyone, public safety matters, and public safety in communities matter. Just like employees want to be safe in the workplace, everyone who's a mom wants their kids to be raised in a place that's safe. Everyone wants communities where they can walk down the street. Everyone wants communities where the streets are clean and you can drink the water that's in the community. Everybody wants that. But we're having a hard time figuring out what the role of police are there. And where some of my friends in law enforcement get themselves in trouble, Andrew, is they want to go back to just lock them up and throw the key away. And it's interesting, it's the same people that don't want to pay more money in taxes, right? And somehow they think building more jails is gonna solve all the problems. And if you understand anything about generational trauma, it's not going to solve the problems. And so it's a very complicated conversation. It's not as simple as you're a law and order person or you're a liberal. And I think we've had too many big swings, and we're seeing it in Vermont, where some folks think the way to do this is we don't need any more jails. After running the jail system in Vermont, I can tell you there's people in jail that need to be in jail. A lot of people end up in jail where they should have been intercepted and diverted further upstream, away from the system. And if we're gonna make progress on this issue about police-community relations, we got to find that balance of how we're going to do that. And goes back to why I think I wanted to get into the coaching business, because I think I can help law enforcement leaders understand that.
I want to thank you, Colonel Baker, for making the time for this conversation. Colonel Baker has set up a new consulting business, the Center for Leadership Development and Coaching. And, wish you the best of luck with it.
Thanks for the plug, Andrew. I appreciate it. And people can find me on the web. So. All
right. Well, there you go. All right. Well, thanks again, Colonel Baker, and thanks to all of you for being with us today as well. I hope you found the program interesting, and we'll see you again the next time. Meanwhile, have a great day.